Welcome to the Visual Content Marketing Show. I'm your host, Krishna Day, and today's conversation is all about the end of Google authorship, what you and I as marketers need to know. Also, if you're an online publisher, there's valuable content in this show for you, particularly in terms of that recent announcement just a week ago in terms of the end of Google authorship. I'm thrilled that today I'm going to be joined by two guests, and let me introduce you to them. They're Enge and Mark Traphagen, and if you are not familiar with their work, perhaps you've come here and you have not been following many people on Google+, I really want to introduce you to them, because if I'm looking on Google+ for content, particularly around search engine optimization, and certainly they talk about content marketing. They've got a great agency called Stone Temple Consulting, but I'll make sure that I head over and I'm watching their content. I watch their Hangout on Air shows. They appear on many as guests, but they also host two, which is one is the Digital Marketing Answers show and the Digital Marketing Excellence show. And the reason that I've brought you to meet with Eric and Mark today is that when I found this announcement, in fact, I think it was the very early hours of the morning for me when I saw this update that had come through around authorship. And don't worry, we'll be getting into what authorship is and what happens next, because I know some of you are probably a little bit confused by it all. But one of the things that I did is I went over and, of course, I could find content, but importantly, they'd written a great article, which I think has been shared so many times. They're becoming the authorities on this topic outside of people who are in Google. And so they're in much demand on this topic, so I'm delighted that they're able to join us here today. So guys, welcome to our Visual Content Marketing Show. Visual content's important, obviously, and this was an important element, but thank you so much for being here with us. And we've got you both together in the office today, which is amazing.
Yes, indeed. This is not the way it normally happens here, but Mark visits up here once a month, so it allows us to sometimes look like we're really friendly.
Yeah,
no matching shirts, though, not today.
We have to test the relationship every once in a while. You know, really be on the, and it's held for 8 months, so we're pretty happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. But thanks for having us.
Oh, so I want to get straight into this because there's so many questions that I've got, and I'm also going to be obviously watching the comments that I hear from people who join us live today, and we'll do as much as we can to answer your questions. But let's start off with Google authorship. And I have to tell you, reading all the content I can see and hearing people talk about this in terms of even on Google Webmaster shows, it feels like I'm only one of the few people who's sorry to see it go. I'm not surprised because of some other things that have been happening in the last number of months. But I have to say I've appreciated Google authorship. But let's start at the beginning about what was it, and I'm going to pull up a screen share in a little bit as well in case people haven't seen this in action. So guys, perhaps you can tell us about what was it and why do we think it mattered at the time?
Okay. Well, Google Authorship was a program that Google ran for 3 years, a little over 3 years, that was basically set up to allow people who create content online to identify that content with a sort of digital signature to Google. Google chose to set up its own program to do this. So it would be just a Google program. It would be independent of what anybody else on the web might be trying to do a similar sort of thing. And the idea was simply that you could link your Google Plus profile to your content anywhere on the web, and then create a link back, which is basically known as a rel equals author link. It's a piece of markup you'd add to the link that would identify to Google, this is meant to say that the person with this profile wrote this piece of material. And Google said that's good enough to establish this as a verified linkage. If the person both has access to the website to be able to put that link there, and has access to the profile to be able to put the link in their contributor to section on their profile, then that's good enough to say this is pretty certain this person is the author. Now, secondarily, what do they want to do with that? Why would people want to bother doing that? Well, Google held out several carrots to authors to incentivize them to do this, one of which they enacted almost right away and was there through much of the authorship experiment. The other two remained speculative and something that might happen for the future. So quickly what those three were, I'll leave the one that they actually did to the last. The two that they said they might do someday is, one, be able to use the data gathered from this to establish for authors their reputation, for lack of a better term, in different topical areas that they write about, that they do content about. How do people react to that writing? How do people trust it? Do people point to it? Do they link to it? Do they seem to see this person as an authority, a trusted authority in a certain topical area? And that they might actually someday use that data as a ranking factor. So something that they would include in all the many hundreds of factors that they put together to decide where things rank in Google search. So that was one. The second is actually related to it, and that was that they said they could use it to help with copy protection. They could use it to help identify the real author of a source and say, when as happens to any of us that gets successful in writing online, inevitably you have people that are going to what we call scrape. They're going to take your entire piece of copy that you've worked hard on, put it on their website, and put it out there and make it look like they wrote it, and often not give you any credit for it. So Google said potentially this could be used for that, and I say that's related because that would be a ranking factor also. Because when Google sees duplicate content, the same content on different websites, they have to decide which one should be at the top, which one should we show the most to people. And obviously, in the case of an exact copy, they would want to give preference to the original author. The third thing, I said two of those were speculative because we don't know that they ever did them. And we're pretty sure they didn't really do them, at least not to any great extent. They may have experimented with those to some extent. They may have used them as a mix in certain web features, like in-depth articles, but it was never really a ranking factor. The third one they did do, and that's the one you have a screenshot for, and that was the big incentive in the beginning, was if you use Google authorship, potentially, not a certainty, but potentially, Google might show your author profile photo next to a search result. And there in the screenshot, you see that at the bottom there as an example of that. So you'd see an author photo, you see next to that the author's name, a byline, and then over time, they kept changing it. They experimented with different things that they would add in. For some period of time, you see there in 217 Google Plus circles. And if you clicked on that, it would take you to the person's Google Plus profile. For a while, it used to be that if you clicked on the name, the byline, it would take you to a dedicated search page that would be just content from that author. So they did all kinds of experiments with it, but that was the main incentive. That was what got people excited about it, because there was a general belief, and I'll stop after this, that when they showed that author photo in search, it draws people's eyes to that search result, even if it's further down the page, and thus more people would be likely to click on that than might normally go to that result if it's further down the first page.
That was a mouthful.
Authorship was not an easy thing. It was not simple.
So I'm just going to add one thing to that, which is just to sort of try to bring it up a level. Authorship really was Google's program to let them figure out who wrote what and try to act on that. And it was for publishers an opportunity to claim ownership of something and hopefully get some benefits, as you described very well, Mark. So that's really what the program was. I think later in the show we can get into sort of what the consequences of all that might be.
So in fact, that's why I've brought you on, because this has all been talked about, but I know the people that are in my communities, people I know on both online and offline, are saying, well, what next? And I know there's questions about, well, should we continue with it, and what should we do with our blogs or our websites? Maybe if you're an online publisher or even a news place, you've got online content and you attributed the content on those sites. over to individuals. That's really what we're going to be talking about today. And I should say that you, in that article, which I'll post a link in a little while about it on the event page, you actually wrote in there about some research that you've done. And I think we'll get into why did Google stop it. But in your research that you did independently, a lot of people hadn't been using it. Now, in the last few years, as I've been talking to organizations and I teach digital marketing, I would always have Google Authorship in there as one of the actions, as in our piece that we talk about Google+. And one of the things that I know has been a challenge is that for large organizations, corporates in particular, and I used to be an employee and a person in one of those organizations, it's very difficult to use authorship in many cases because the content isn't attributed to any one person. So whatever the function is, the content's there on the websites, unless it's a blog or some kind of article content. Mostly content on a corporate website does not actually attribute that to a particular author. Of course, there might be some exceptions to that, such as if you're in public relations and you've got a channel there for your news and your press releases, you might have used it in that case. So I was seeing that there was not a lot of organizations using it, but smaller organizations, particularly if they had a business blog, and of course solopreneurs and entrepreneurs might have used it as well. So perhaps you can go through what you found in the research and then what you think has led to Google making these changes, because I know there's some other factors that have come into play which probably people aren't aware of. And then we'll be going on to, so what do we need to do about it?
Sure. So I'll take that one. We did study, we took 150 prominent websites, prominent publishing websites. I'm talking about news sites like the New York Times and TechCrunch and Mashable, and in the search industry, Search Engine Land, Search Engine Watch, and there's major publications, and we reviewed their usage of rel author. And of 500 authors that we looked at across those 150 websites, 70% of them either did not have a Google Plus page or did not have a link from their Google Plus page to the site that they were producing content on. And the practical impact of that is that they could not actually benefit from authorship, even if the website they were publishing on attempted to let them benefit from authorship. So then, of the 150 websites we looked at, 50 of those didn't even have author pages for people, which kind of limited the degree of their participation, although there were still ways to do it. And at least 2/3 of them were either not attempting to do authorship or they were doing it incorrectly. So there was many different scenarios where it was kind of broken. And the reason for this, I think, is first of all, there was a number of people who just never learned about it, because when Google announces these initiatives, they never actually promote them really. They kind of wait for them to sort of organically get promoted by other people. So that's one reason. But the other is that it involved two actions at a minimum. The website on which the author's content would appear would have to implement a link in one fashion or another to the author's Google Plus profile. And there were several different ways that Google allowed to do that, but in some fashion there had to be a link to the author's Google Plus profile, or at least the author's email address that appeared in the Google Plus profile on the publishing site. And then the author also had to implement a link to declare that they were a contributor to that site. And so there's a little bit of a handshake required for that to work. And even though it's kind of simple, handshake, it was a lot of effort for people, because it probably took a hour research to figure out that that's all you needed to do. It wasn't really made, the information wasn't made accessible in a way that most media sites could use it. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
And Krishna, you hit on another very interesting aspect of it. I think more of the sociological aspect of it. When I would, I talked in conferences for almost 3 years about Google authorship, and almost invariably in the Q&A period, there'd always be somebody who'd raise their hand and say, well, at my company, they don't allow individuals to author articles, or we want the corporate logo on all of our articles. We don't want, a face or a name. So that was a big cultural, corporate cultural thing to overcome. In fact, it spawned me to finally write an article back in January for Moz, pleading with companies to break out of that and to explore at least the power that can come when you have names and faces on your content. But that was a big hurdle for a lot of verticals.
Now, in terms of the demise, there's also some technical reasons that this has happened. I think it might be useful just spending a minute or two to explain what Google's rationale has been, and some things that they've also been talking about, the impact in terms of on mobile as well.
Sure, I think I'll take that one too, because basically what we're looking at there, Krishna, is that it's actually not true that Google has unlimited computing resources, and we all tend to sit back and think they have this enormous wealth of computing power, and they do. But like any other organization that invests a lot of money in certain kinds of assets, they have to think about how they allocate those assets and how they get the best return on those assets. And this relates to what John Mueller told Mark in the conversation, that the computing power that they were spending on trying to track authorship did not bring enough benefit to them to justify continuing the program. That is really that simple. Yeah. We're spending X. We need to see at least Y of a return, however they define Y, but Y, this quantity that I'm calling Y, is probably enough benefit to end users. So it costs us this much, we need to see at least this much benefit to end users to justify this, and they weren't seeing that much benefit.
And of course, again, we don't know all what that means. What's the benefit that Google was looking for out of this, ultimately, that they didn't see in the end. But we can guess some things. And one thing might be simply related to what we talked about in the previous segment, where we said that there wasn't across-the-board adoption of Google authorship, or even where it was adopted, it often wasn't done correctly. There were verticals we saw, business verticals, where there was tons of it. People were using, real estate agents and lawyers especially just jumped all over this and were trying to put authorship on everything that they possibly could, whereas other areas of business were hardly using it at all. So what does that do for the user in Google? That's not a good signal. Google needs to have a fair signal. They need to be able to say, like, if we're going to really measure authors and put some kind of special stamp on there that seems to imply, Google never said this, but people would take it this way, you see a photo of a face next to a search result or a name, and that just implies that Google is saying, like, this is special, this stands out from the rest. But I think at the end of the day, Google decided we can't really say that. First of all, it's not a fair mix in the search results for it to only show up in some searches and not others because it's not being used. But also, at a deeper level, I don't think Google was yet ready with all of the things in place to be able to accurately, to their satisfaction, measure this is a quality, trusted author. Now, obviously, they can know that to some extent about some authors. There are some authors that are just so famous, so well known, so big that it's a no-brainer. But for maybe that middle section of authors that they might want to be able to say, hey, here's this person, she's relatively unknown, but she should be trusted. I don't think they were fully ready to be able to implement that, and again, especially on a limited database.
I think the other thing for me, in terms of if I look at it from a Google perspective, what we know is they constantly are changing. I mean, that's just how it is, isn't it? In terms of there's tools that we've used in the past that are no longer with us, things that we might have got to use and like. I think in terms of in their world, they're constantly experimenting. But the big takeaway I think I had was two things. One was about probably not understanding what the required resources were behind the scenes, as you mentioned. And secondly, another thing that I'd seen comment on is, trying to make sure that search on mobile is easy. And, those of us that are searching on smartphones, we don't have a lot of space. And I think that was one of the other comments that was made there. But let's move on and talk about the important piece for me, which is, so what next? So the questions that I know are coming through in terms of where, both here on the event, but also separately, is that what do we need to do? What do we recommend? Because some people, in terms of in their own business, or if they've got a publishing platform online or organizations, have implemented Google Authorship. So what do we do now? Do we leave it there? Do we take it off? Is there a benefit of continuing to put it on there, even though author markup in its sense isn't really recognized in terms of its, you go to the link on Google now, it says, well, it's no longer supported, but you need to look at a thing called rich snippets. So let's start with where we've got authorship in place. And guys, what have you done? I'm sure on your own sites and your own blogs that you've been using that. What have you been doing in the last week around moving forward?
Well, the easy, quick answer to that is that there's no danger or there's no harm in leaving those links in place. As even John Mueller himself said later in a Webmasters Hangout, there's still links. He wasn't going to say anything more about what that means, but they're still active links. That means they still carry some information for Google. Google may not be tracking specific author data using rel equals author, but you're still linked to that. But I think we maybe need to back up before we talk about what you should do next to a little bit better understand where we think Google might be going, because it doesn't make any sense to start doing something or be doing more or less of something unless you have some vision, or at least a good guess of where you think Google might be going next. So just to back up, I know Eric's going to have some things to add on this too, but I think overall, as we said in our article, we're convinced that the demise of this specific project that we call Google Authorship is in no way means that Google has lost interest in the idea of author authority. It's wrapped up, it's just so integral to the direction that they're moving with what we call semantic search and the knowledge graph, knowledge vault projects that are already in progress, where Google wants to now be able to go beyond dependence on human actions, the complex, as Eric was saying earlier, part of the failure of authorship was that there's so much you had to do. Users had to do so many things and do them exactly right to get it to work. The next step for Google is really to be able to go beyond that and say, we want to find ways that we can identify that Eric Enge is an author online, and that we can identify that these pieces of content out here have a very high likelihood of being connected with Eric, that they are by him. And now we can use that data and get a rich, full database around Eric Enge and what he does, and build something that's really valuable. Just now, that may be years yet in the coming, in the developing. But all that just to say, the first thing that I wanted to say, and I'll give the chair to Eric here, is that we still think that Google is committed to the overall idea. So the takeaway from that for all of us should be, aside from whatever you do with links or markup or anything like that, continue to build your personal authority as an author. If you're doing that at all, continue to do that. Continue to connect your your content to your Google Plus profile, because it's an identifier. It's useful to users to know who you are. They can follow you there, and ultimately it serves as a link that helps Google to be sure that you're the author of that content. But keep on building good content. Keep on associating your name with it. Those are all good things to be doing just in general in online marketing, aside from anything that Google might be doing. Eric, what do you want to add?
Yeah,
well,
no,
I
I
actually want
agree.
to come back to the subject of deeper content a little later on, because I want to add a few bonus questions in, which I'd like to talk about. But Eric, so what do you want to say about this piece in terms of particularly around what you might have been doing and what you think is the big picture?
Yeah, so to the basic question, there's no harm in leaving the authorship tags in place. And as Mark mentioned, John Mueller said that there's still links, there's still value. Google may still use them to detect who the author, original author of something is, and I think that's still things of value, right? And that's not the rel author program that we started with, perhaps, but I think there's still value with that. But in terms of the big picture, building your personal authority, and for a brand, building your brand authority remain essential. Quite honestly, if the reason why we were pursuing building our personal authority was to get our picture in the search results, we were pursuing it for the wrong reason. Because there's so many other benefits. Marketing yourself as an individual or marketing the company you work for to establishing that authority, both for the company overall and the individuals within the company. So
let me come to a very specific question then. Let's say you were invited to do a guest blog post somewhere. Or, for example, Eric, I know both yourself and Mark are actively publishing content on LinkedIn. And one of the things that we might have done in the past is link the rel author from that content, and in some cases it might have been just done by an individual blog post, and in other cases it might have been because you're contributing consistently and that publisher had got that in place. Or you're starting a new site. Tell us what you would recommend doing. Should we still be having that link back to Google Plus profiles? And we'll come to brand pages in a little while, but should we have that link to the Google Plus profile and the link back from the profile in terms of as a contributor to that content?
Yeah, so to my view, I would say yes. I may differ from Mark on this one because to me, I'm not going to worry about whether there's a rel equals author markup on the link from the content to the Google Plus profile. But I do think that I want to link to my Google Plus profile, and by the way, to my Twitter profile, and potentially other profiles, right? I would still do that. I think it's very helpful, and I certainly will be putting contributor to links in my Google Plus profile to anywhere where I write. That identity information is still incredibly valuable to Google, right? And going back to the study data we did, what we actually saw is that Google had begun to accept things as being valid author linkages that did not follow the specifications correctly, because they kind of gave up on people doing it right, and they started to look for clues to make the connection on their own. So helping them make that connection that you are this person who created that piece of content will remain a very important thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I will continue to do that. I will continue to make that two-way link between my content and my Google Plus profile, because, and again, I really do agree with Eric. It's not, I wouldn't advise anybody to get frantic about still getting a rel equals author tag on there. I might still do it when I have control over the site, or the ability when I'm actually creating the link. Simply because, not because I think Google's secretly using it or anything, but John Mueller did encourage us to continue to use the general schema markup. Rel equals author, by the way, was not originally part of schema.org, the official nonprofit that the search engines recognize that sets up the standards of these schema markups. It was part of a different set of markup that Google adopted. However, as it began being widely used, if you go to the author section of schema.org, it does say that because it's being widely used in HTML5, rel equals author as a tag, that they recognize it as an equivalent to author. So John Mueller suggested that it still could be useful to Google in some way if you mark your authored content with the schema or author tag. Therefore, authors tags, I don't think they're going to be used in the same way that they've been. But here's the big picture. I'll cut right to the chase, relating to what I said a moment ago. If we're right about this, if Google is moving toward a bigger picture where they want to be able to identify authors on the web and the content that they're connected with and the trust value around them and all these things, they're not going to ignore clear signal. While they're going to have to do it without depending on direct signals, they're not going to ignore them. So that, they're going to want all the help they can get. So any connections that you can make for Google are going to remain helpful.
Well, I also just wanted to make sure that we cover off the fact that some people might be confused, because when we're logged into Google Plus, we're still seeing though something that looks a bit like Google Authorship. So Mark, back over to yourself, because I'm going to pull up a screen share in a minute which has you on it. And perhaps you could tell us why this is happening, because this looks very like we would have had in terms of happening, previously when we were not logged into Google. So in this screen share, what I'm seeing here is at the right-hand side, you can see Mark's Google Plus page. You can see I've actually got him into certain circles. You can see his most recent post at the time I did this screenshot. You can also see the content he's got there in terms of on Twitter, and a bit later on you can see the private message I was sending to Eric and to Mark about this event. So why is this happening then, Mark?
Well, this has always been there, but now that regular authorship is gone, Google seems to be emphasizing it all the more. And the first thing, most important thing to emphasize about this is you're only going to see this in what we call personalized search, which means that you are logged in to the same Google account that you use for Google+. And if you have people that you have circled on Google+, and we've seen people have sent me evidence that to a certain extent it can even happen for people you have in your Gmail contacts who use Google+, and they have content that's relevant to a search that you do, Google may elevate that, and I emphasize that word. This is being the results that you're showing there, you would not see if you were logged out, if you did a regular logged out search. These are being elevated and emphasized for you because it's content from your Google Plus circles, your Google contacts, that Google thinks has a good chance of being highly relevant. Now you're searching for Mark Traphagen. What could be more relevant than a post from Mark Traphagen, right?
Wow.
I may not stand for anything else in this world, but I think I'm relevant to myself. What we're seeing in the right-hand side there is called a knowledge panel result, and that's again because you have me circled on Google Plus. You're getting that, but yeah, it's very interesting to see this. And by the way, this has been happening in certain parts of Europe, at least, for over a year. But starting on June 28th, the day that Google removed authorship from, removed author photos, that was kind of the first stage, from regular search, but continued at that point still putting up bylines, regular authorship, was the first day I noticed here in the US branded Google Plus results like this. So if I follow, I circle Stone Temple Consulting. Always a good idea to circle your employer. And Stone Temple Consulting does post content on Google Plus. So when I search something now that's relevant to something Google Plus has posted, I will sometimes see in my search results elevated that post, the Google Plus post, with the brand logo, our brand logo next to it, just like an author photo, and in place of the byline it says Stone Temple Consulting. So yeah, this is again, Google is now saying, so what if we take, the takeaway from that is, well, Google said we weren't seeing enough value in the general authorship results to continue doing that, value to users and value to whatever we want to get out of it. Obviously, they see a lot of value in showing you content from people that you have intentionally connected with. And that makes some sense.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing content on when I'm doing a search. I'm logged into Google where I've actually circled brands and that those logos are coming out. Mm-hmm. Before I get on to specifically in terms of brands, I'd like to just stop for a moment and say, what does this thing that we've just seen when we're logged into Google and we're seeing the example I gave you there of doing a search for yourself, and I did the same. I could see you there as well, Eric, and see our private conversations that we'd had. But what does it tell us about what we should be aware of when posting on Google+? Because I see all sorts, and I'm sure you do, of levels of quality of content. So does this highlight we should be being more particular about the way we post on Google+? And if so, what should we be thinking of?
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize very quickly, because that will freak people out immediately, that you mentioned that you saw private conversation, that the circle privacy limits that you use on Google Plus are respected. They carry over into Google search. So that second result, that was a private conversation between the three of us, was only showing in your search because you were in that conversation. So the only people in the world that could ever see that, even in Google search, would be the three of us. Just want to emphasize that. But the second and bigger picture is, to answer your question, it means that you should be aware that there's great value in creating posts on Google Plus that have real content to them, that are talking about the things that people that you want to reach out to, people you want to influence, will be searching for. Just like you should be thinking about that in terms of SEO on your website when you create content. You're thinking about things like keywords. You're thinking about semantic structure, related topics, building relevancy around a subject area. All these things, that applies here now. If you're not just dumping links on Google Plus, but you're actually creating useful content, and then it has words in it that people search for when they're looking for what you talk about, that's what's going to get that surfaced in that personalized search.
Yeah, and it's just to draw a couple points out there. A lot of people, when they first come to Google Plus, they treat it a little bit like Twitter, and it's here's a link with just like a sentence or two, and that's not going to play that well in this environment. So I think what Mark is saying, and just to recap it, is a more expanded sort of discussion is what the Google Plus platform is really good at. And that's really what will play best in this environment that you showed, Krishna, with that post. Because now if someone clicks on that post, and all they do is they see a sentence that says, hey, this is a great article, click here, and a link to another article, that's not a great experience. You want to have a little more depth to all of that. But I do actually want to mention one other thing, because this has come up a lot too. So a lot of people who think that this is just another sign that Google Plus is in trouble, right? That authorship has been pulled out of the mix. But in fact, this bit about them leaving that personalization in and those photos in and those bylines in for the kinds of connections you just showed, right? You searched on Mark Traphagen, you got a picture of him, got a picture, in our private conversation. That shows that they see enough value in it to leave it in place for those personalized connections on Google Plus, which they wouldn't be doing if they didn't see value in Google Plus, if that makes sense. So, just to address that question, which a lot of people have.
Oh yes, there was certainly lots of conversations about, is this the end of Google Plus? And well, at some stage, if it does come to an end, that's fine, because it's a free platform, and we should all not be building all of our content on one place, and that's why we have several places and are owning our own domains as well. But that's another conversation for another day. Let's just move now on terms of looking for brands and company pages. So some people who are here watching the show and others who might watch later are probably going to have a company page. And what you were describing before about the kind of one-line post and a link to content, that's what I see on a lot of those brand pages. And I know there's not going to be kind of an absolute answer, but would love to have two elements of this piece. One is rel equals publisher still important? Because I know many organizations have just done that, but they've not done anything in terms of publishing then any content. And the second part to my question, which I know what the answer was going to be, he's not going to give me a definitive answer, but if you were to recommend to organizations who are posting on Google+, what would you say would be a good average sense of length of piece of content? So organizations typically are not going to write 1,000 words in an article, and some people we know mutually actually do write very long, extensive thought leadership articles. That's not what I think organizations are going to do, unless something changes in their mindset or they can see a different ROI. But so perhaps you can answer that question for me around, should brands and organizations still have business pages? And secondly, what's a good kind of sense of amount of content that they should be publishing there?
So the first part of that is the rel publisher tag is still being looked at by Google.
Still supported.
So if you have a rel publisher tags on your site pointing to your brand page, you should continue to do that. If you don't have a rel publisher tag on your site pointing to your brand page, then you should add it. That is still useful for Google. In particular for smaller brands, creating that connection for Google in a way that's unmistakable is a very valuable thing for them to do. There are other benefits to brand pages that are worth talking about. If you have a brand page that that's up and that you're reasonably active on Google+, all right, and then someone does a search on your brand name, you get that kind of knowledge panel that you saw for Mark when you showed that screenshot earlier, but it's for your brand. And why that's incredibly valuable is if somebody tries to do competitive bidding on your brand name,
for AdWords ads,
on AdWords, it pushes all that down, right? And it's a very effective thing from that perspective. But even aside from the paid search perspective, it gives you a lot of incremental branding for yourself when people do search on your brand name, which is by itself very powerful. So one more element to your question, which is, how much should they do, and what should the lengths of those things be? Well, you're right. It's a very hard question to give a definitive answer to, but I do think that one aspect that we can call out, and I'm sure that Mark will add a lot to this, but the thing that's most unique about Google+ is it's the best platform out there, bar none, for long-form discussion. So you can write if you want, you can write a 700-word post on Google+. I'm not saying that's your general thing that you can do, but you might get a 400-word comment back from someone. That doesn't happen anywhere else, right? And so you can get into these deeper dialogues, and that to me is one of the things that's so powerful about the platform is the ability to do that. So for me, I think about Google+, okay, that's one of the unique parts. The other part is you can reach audiences that aren't on the other platforms, right? Or maybe they are on the platforms but not quite as active. So just like any social platform, you have a real opportunity to create real engagement and real relationships. So you want to be going out with mostly non-commercial content, trying to figure out how to add value to people's lives in dialogues that you can establish with them on the platform.
Yeah. And I would just add to that yeah, you're right. We can't expect brands, especially small business people, tell them like, yeah, you now need to go and start writing 3,000-word blog posts on Google+. Like you said, Krishna, they're just not going to do that, and they don't need to do that. The next step up from just posting links on Google+ or one-liners, read this article link, kind of things, is just add a little bit of value to those posts. And by adding value, I mean explain why. If you're let's just talk about a link post. You're going to share a link now, either to your own content or some curated content that you found that you think is valuable to your audience. Add a few lines, add a couple of paragraphs explaining to your audience why you're posting that, why it's valuable to them, why they should click through and read it. People really appreciate that and pay attention to it, and it incredibly ups the value. Let me just quickly say, we ran a 1-week test last week for one of our clients who was using Google+ regularly, but pretty much all they were doing was posting links or one-liners on there. And they got a certain amount of activity. Most of their posts got 1 or 2 plus ones. Every 5th or 6th post might get a comment. Might get 1 or 2 shares. And it was just kind of plodding along with that. We did a 1-week test where we spent a whole week building the kind of content that I just talked about. Not huge, big, long, complicated thought leadership posts, just adding more value to it, just explaining, what the value of this is, putting a little bit more words in there that had meaning, and we significantly upped during that week, the followers, the engagement, the views, every metric on Google Plus went up significant amount, and very much excited the client when they saw that. Just that little bit of effort.
Right, and that's really consistent though with what I was saying. Even though I said that you could write 700-word posts and get a 300-word comment, the point really is that you want to get a certain amount of engagement happening, and so not just doing that link dump, click here kind of thing. Even 2 or 3 sentences of commentary of what you found most important at that link is enough to cause people to engage very differently with you.
And then remember, just quickly, one more little benefit to that, going back to what you were showing earlier with the personalized search, that logged in search. All those people that are following your brand when they're logged in, if you've added some verbiage, you've added some content to your posts, it makes it much more likely that those posts are going to have a chance of coming up in their search, and that's when you want it. When that person is looking for the thing that you are about, they're looking on search for that, and your post is, oh yeah, there's XYZ brand. I remember I've connected with them. I'm going to read that one first. That's hugely powerful, and you can only get that if you're putting the content up there.
Well, that example of the screen share that I shared, again, it's back to consistency, and that was for an individual. Obviously, it was yourself, Mark, versus it being an organization's page, and I certainly see that with some organizations where they're getting that additional real estate on the right-hand side of the page. But it was interesting, even the thing I noticed about, for example, on that screen share that I showed, is the fact that your last post had a photograph with it. And that also caught my attention. So even though I'm connected to you, that additional piece of content actually might drive me to come back and see more of your content and spend more time browsing on your Google Plus profile, because maybe I'd missed some of your content during the last number of days or the last number of weeks. So again, back to visual content, making sure that if you can do, having images with your content on Google Plus is important. And I think, as you mentioned before, in terms of on organizations' pages where they're doing a very quick update, because that's almost like Twitter speak, and also Facebook. I mean, Facebook, we always say make sure you keep your content up short and brief there, and all the other things that are going on with their algorithm. It is a different mindset for us to consider.
Yes.
As we transition, and we'll be, looking to kind of check out all of your comments. Thank you, everybody who's commenting. And if there's questions that we haven't managed to cover now, I know we'll come back and look at the event page later. And I've also want to mention a resource for you specifically about where you can talk about this further towards the end of our time together. I actually want to have this bonus piece in, because you guys not only look at search engine optimization, but you're also content marketers and educating people around that. So here's my bonus piece, and it's in a two-parter. When you talk about semantic search and the things that I've read about it, what I'm seeing is that we're being encouraged to make our content more complete, and perhaps you can go into that. I know it's something you talked about on a Hangout yourselves that you were hosting recently. And I think people listening to that, I walked away saying, people are going to be quite discouraged, because in the past, when, let's say, take a business blog, people might have been putting 300, 400, 500 words there. What I was walking away from your most recent event that I watched was when it was a description, say, make your content as complete as possible. So make it more complete than other people, which means that there might be more links and references, and therefore potentially longer pieces of content. So I'd like for you to firstly talk about what does that mean for us, because I think that will frighten off a lot of organizations who are using business blogging. And then the second part of that is I'm starting to see a lot of individuals who perhaps don't have a blog for their organization are using LinkedIn Publisher for content. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that in a minute, but this might be publishing content on LinkedIn or on a business blog. What are your thoughts about this piece around our content needs to be much more extensive?
So I'll do semantic and you do LinkedIn?
Sounds like a good division.
Okay, we've divided the tasks up. So for the semantic piece, I'm just going to give an example to illustrate where Google is coming from and then I'll talk about and explain where Google is coming from in a little more detail. So imagine that you do a search for something like women's shoes, and that's not necessarily a blogging topic, but it will help illustrate the point. And you come to a website, and it says women's shoes can be found on this page. Here are some women's shoes. Women's shoe number 1, women's shoe number 2, etc. But it doesn't actually allow you to buy the shoe at that point. Sounds a lot potentially like an affiliate page, right? Because you might have to click on a link, you go to someone else's site, and then you have to buy the shoe there. In Google's eyes, that's an incomplete experience, because even though you clicked on this page and did show women's shoes, they know that a significant percentage of the people who are typing that in actually will probably want to buy them, so there should be a way to buy now or a shopping cart link. They know a significant number of those people want to be able to check you out, so they want to see an About Us page. They want to see a privacy policy. They want to see things that create that a larger percentage of the users they send to that site will be satisfied. That's what we mean by completeness. So Google's perspective here is, if you're going to click a link in my search results and I'm going to send someone to your search page, I want you to satisfy a larger percentage of the users than the next step down from you in the results. So that really means thinking through the various things that someone might have in mind when they come to your page that you've created with a goal of ranking for a given search result. That's what completeness is about. Now, how can you try to figure out what that means, right? How could you, now that I have some sense of what completeness means, how can I do an analysis to figure out what I need to do with my content? Well, a pretty good way to do that is actually look at the first 5 or 6 search results and try to figure out what elements they have on their page. And it isn't just about the article. If it's a blog post, a chunk here that's an article. Oh, got to hold it up high enough. But it's a little bit about what's in the footer navigation. What are the companion pages that someone can click through to? It's not a simple thing to deal with, and I can understand why some people would be discouraged by that. But it really means that if you want to be competitive in this new world with Google, that you have to step back and really think about, if my site is about left-handed golf clubs, how I can satisfy more users who have requests for information or products or whatever about left-handed golf clubs than anyone else. And that's the problem that semantic search pushes us to try and solve.
I think before I talk about LinkedIn, just one thing I'd add to that. I think that's excellent. Very good big picture of what you need to be doing and thinking on your site as a whole. But there is an aspect on the content itself, and that is, we're going to see increasingly that Google is looking for, I would use the term richer content, which means that it's content that shows signs that it's really trying to give an expert level take on the topics that you talk about. It's not just that we all can recognize now, and Google can too, that churn and burn kind of content, the content that people pay, somebody $5 overseas to just put on their site just so it has keywords on the page. But it doesn't really, when you go to it, it's not teaching you anything. You're not getting a sense, this is telling me something I'm not going to get anywhere else. And the other sense of that completeness is that it's not so much about the length of your individual posts. I wouldn't get obsessed with that as it is overall in your writing, on your site, on your content. Are you covering the general topics you want to be known for thoroughly and well? Are you talking about every aspect of them? These things set up the semantic clues to Google that there's richness here, that this really is a site that has a lot of rich information around this general topic area. So I think if you keep those two things in mind, you're going to be doing well for the future. Let me quickly move to your question about LinkedIn specifically. That could be a whole other show on its own. It's something that Eric and I are becoming very interested in, that we're actively pursuing now. We're publishing using the new LinkedIn publisher aspect of that. Why would you do that? Really, that ties into why would you write on other sites? Why not just put all your content on your own site? And that is, I really got to speak to a concept that Eric has been promoting. I think is important. It's called OPA, other people's audiences. The main goal of that should not be an SEO goal. It should not be, do I get links? It's great, wonderful if you can get links out of it. On LinkedIn specifically, don't even worry about that because the links are all no-follow. They don't pass any PageRank authority. So why would you do it? You do it to get your name and your reputation, your expertise in front of new audiences. LinkedIn is a great example because there's this vast audience of people that have there who are, especially if you're marketing in the business world, that's most of the people on LinkedIn, they're business people, that's the topics they're interested in. So if you're writing authoritative, good content about that, and people are engaging with it, LinkedIn does a very good job of pushing that content out to people it thinks will be interested in it. So that's getting your name in front of people. They begin to associate, they start seeing that again and again. They start associating with, Krishna Day is a great authority on visual content, and that can lead to engagements that eventually will lead to business benefit for you. So I think that's why you do that primarily.
And so I'll just add one little bit to that too, which is a lot of people tend to think, well, okay, I'm getting in front of the same people on a new platform, but that's actually not the case, right? So remember, we would like Facebook is everywhere, right? Well, the reality is Facebook in the United States is on approximately 50% of the population has it. That means 50% of the population doesn't. And people need to remember that, and of the 50% that do, they're not all active. And the reason why I'm going through that is there's among the senior executives and the sort of marketing and business people, there's a lot of people who are on LinkedIn that are not on Facebook, Google+, or Twitter.
Yeah.
So you can get in front of audiences that aren't available in those other places.
Well, I think I'm going to have to invite you back, guys, because you've kind of opened up the door there to a future show on LinkedIn, because I've certainly got some observations about what's working and what isn't, and I'm sure you have with what you've been sharing. So be prepared. You'll get another private message from me at some stage to say, will you come back? I think in terms of you talking, though, about semantic content and being as complete as possible, I hope that our viewers will find that you have been incredibly complete. I think you have. I think if Google was looking at us in terms of in the real world, or if they actually could look at look inside a Google Hangout and actually kind of look at it for the quality of content, you've been terrific guests. I really appreciate the fact that you've invested so much time here today to go in depth in terms of trying to help us understand about what the end of authorship means and what we should be doing next, because I think that's been a piece that's a lot of people have been missing, and I really appreciate you being here. So perhaps you wanted to tell people how they can best get in contact with you, and also, Mark, perhaps you can talk about the community as well, about thought leadership and personal authority, where people can come and connect and ask more questions on this topic in that community.
Sure. So in terms of contacting us, stonetemple.com is the website. I'm at Enge at stonetemple.com, or plus Eric Enge on Google+. And you are?
Mark Traphagen.
Well, I got that part, yeah, but where are you?
Okay. Sorry. I thought you'd forgotten. I say that because I have one of those great SEO-friendly names. Just search Mark Traphagen. You'll find my social profiles. The whole first page of Google is my social profiles. So I use Google as my business card. You mentioned about the community. First of all, I do want to quickly note that I noticed there were a lot of questions in the chat that we didn't get to. Eric and I will come back. We commit to that. As we're able to throughout the day, come back and try to answer as many of those questions as we can.
Absolutely.
But second, you thanks for the plug about the community. I started back when communities first started a Google Authorship and AuthorRank community that became the largest non-Google run community about Google authorship on the web. A very active community. Obviously now that topic is going to fade and die somewhat. So we want to think about what do we do with this next. And what Eric and I thought about was, what's the bigger picture behind that? Why do we really do Google Authorship? We're doing it for the right reasons. And so, as you said, we're going to rename or repurpose the community as the Thought Leadership and Personal Authority community. I know those are kind of buzzwords, but they're words that people are familiar with. The real goal there is to help people develop their personal authority online, to benefit themselves, benefit their businesses, their causes, whatever that may be. That's the new thing we're going to be talking about. The big decision we have to make now is Google doesn't allow name changes after you've gone past 500. We have 28,000 members. So unless they answer my appeal to change the name, we may just let that community be and try to build a new one. So stay tuned on that. We'll see what we do with it.
Oh. Yeah, I noticed that Google had changed a name and a YouTube channel for one of their products in the last day, and so I guess it depends on who you know, Mark, in terms of whether or not you'll be able to get that name changed.
I'm trying to work
to set up an online petition for you. Okay, so thank you again for being with us here, and I just want to round off the show, as I always do, with some reminders to us all. In terms of Mark and Eric have invested their time here today to share with us lots of really helpful and valuable advice. And so I always want to encourage you to think about what can you do now in terms of taking that advice and adopting it and adapting it for your organization, for your personal needs, and then look to apply it to your organization. Of course, go into the community. The link has been posted previously now in terms of into the event. So go over there, and also, of course, make sure you circle Stone Temple Consulting and, of course, Mark and Eric here on Google+. If you do have questions that you want to talk to me about, just to let you know, I actually host helpouts now, and you can actually find me at helpoutsformarketing.com, and you'll find a number of events over there. And at the time of us talking about this, some of those are in fact free. I can't promise that that will be the case going forward in the future, but if you want a brief consultation with myself about some of the things that we've talked about now, or of course broadly in terms of digital marketing and visual content marketing, I'd be very happy to talk to you there, and you can book some time with me. Thank you everybody for being here as part of this Visual Content Marketing Show program. And I look forward to continuing the conversation in the event page, and of course making sure that you actually keep in contact with us and let us know what questions you have. What you ask also can be reflected in future shows that we host as well. So thanks again everybody for watching the Visual Content Marketing Show, and I look forward to connecting with you next time.